Welcome, everybody. It's nice to see people arriving. I'm Abigail Pogrebin. For those who don't know me, I am going to be your hopefully intrepid moderator tonight. I'm just waiting for people to join. The numbers are growing. I think you are seeing me and the beautiful rose window at Central Synagogue. So impressed. Oh, there's one of our panelists. Hello, Richard Cohn, Cantor Richard Cohn. And there is our trusted senior Cantor Dan Mutlu. Hello, guys.
Good evening. Lashana Tova almost.
Lashana Tova almost. Right. We don't want to jump the gun. Richard, this is all about anticipation and preparation.
So. I'm ready. Let's go. Let's go.
I'm not ready.
We have to work our way up to that greeting. I just want to give, props to the 190 plus people that are giving up an August hour to learn deeply and prepare for this important holiday. Just give a few seconds for people to arrive. Dan Mutlu, let's hear your voice if you want to share some poetry with us, some of your reflections on the day as we let people come in.
This is my voice. It is my voice, and I use it to sing and speak, and cantors can actually speak. Who would have thought?
We didn't know.
Right.
We didn't know that.
No, we wouldn't have known. But I say hello to everybody watching us and welcome, and thank you for being willing to dive deep into some Rosh Hashanah liturgy tonight.
And Richard, you're the emeritus here. Any words of wisdom?
I'm really happy to be sitting in the chapel at Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion at 1 West 4th in New York, where Cantor Mutlu gave his senior recital back in the day, of which we're going to enjoy hearing an excerpt this evening.
Yes, that's a very good tease, actually. Let me start with a few thank yous, obviously to our senior Rabbi Angela Bookdahl for blessing this whole series, which was conceived by Rabbi Sarah Bertman, who's in charge of our adult education, and to Joy Levitt, Rabbi Joy Levitt, one of my personal rabbis, formerly director, impresario at the JCC in Manhattan, Marlene Meyerson, and all of our tech crew and fellow clergy and everyone who has just been so supportive of this, and to all of you. And whether you're on Facebook or with us tonight, we are now going to begin. We are focusing on Rosh Hashanah. This is the second of 3 in a series where we're taking the dive on our liturgical music, why we sing it, where it comes from, and hopefully so that it deepens our actual spiritual experience. Before we get to the 2 songs that you're each unpacking, I want to try to go to 10,000 feet on Rosh Hashanah, because sometimes we kind of forget what this holiday is actually marking, that it is not just the birthday of the world, but kind of the anniversary of creation. Dan, let me just get a few words on that. Why is it significant, do you think, that we are actually marking what God gave us all in terms of creating the world? And how is it a birthday in addition to sort of for all of us being kind of a psychological reset?
Well, I'm going to go with the simple answer to start, which is that because God told us so. If you look in Leviticus 23:23, and this is the portion that we read on many of the festivals, and it reminds us of all of these sacred times of the year. It starts with this charge: speak to the Israelite people, in the 7th month, on the 1st day of the month, you shall observe complete rest, a sacred occasion commemorated with loud blasts. You shall not work, and you shall bring an offering to God. Now, this is actually Rosh Hashanah. In the Torah, it's not written as Rosh Hashanah, and it's not even written as the 1st month. It's written as the 7th month, and that has actually bewildered scholars for a while. Why is it the 7th month in the Torah, but it's become Rosh Hashanah? And there's a beautiful teaching that Passover should actually be the 1st month, because that's when we were liberated. So it was the 1st month for us. But you kind of hit the nail on the head already, Abby, because you said that celebrating God's creation and the anniversary of the world, the 1st day of the 7th month is actually for God and for the earth and for the universe and for all of God's creation. So when we celebrate that, we're going outside of ourselves. we're saying, okay, this is not just for us and for our freedom and our liberation and to be who we are. This is for all humanity, all of creation. And I know you're going to ask soon about kind of the relationship between that and Yom Kippur, but we'll just leave it at that. That is, if you look at the Torah, this is really for God and for the entirety of God's creation.
Nice. And Richard, as Dan just clued, I wanted to pause for a minute as to why Rosh Hashanah precedes Yom Kippur. It's not necessarily intuitive, at least to me, that it seems like we should be kind of expiating our sins before we go to a celebration of the restart, of the new year, of refreshment, of beginning again. Shouldn't we look back before we go forward?
Well, it's a great question, and we have started our backward looking in our discussion last week about Elul and about the approaching Slichot season. For me, it's about the dialectic between humility and awe. So in order to engage God from a place of gratitude and of a certain kind of modesty, it's very instructive to encounter God as the transcendent presence of life. And so in connecting with creation that's constantly being renewed in every moment, even this morning, I started out the day in Chicago and I was on an early flight from O'Hare. The sun was just coming up. I was thinking about our conversation this evening and I looked around me and I said, Magadlu Ma'asecha, how incredible are your creations, including us as creations of the Holy One. And it's almost like we have to access our sense of amazement, the whole radical amazement theology, in order to then be fully present in humility and acknowledge where we could make ourselves, our lives, our relationships, and the world more whole.
And I also would add, because I'm always, it seems to be, at least from last week, the one who's striking the morbid note or the sobering note, that Yom Kippur is going to be very much about our death or the potential for not getting another year or another day. And it feels like, dovetailing with what you were just teaching, that we should appreciate this world, because then the stakes are as high as they should be for considering the possibility of not being able to enjoy it anymore. That, at least to me, it's sort of like, now that I'm celebrating this thing, how much more sober is this work I have to do in order to hopefully be able to continue to enjoy it?
That's really insightful, Abby. And I keep thinking, well, often on Rosh Hashanah evening, we're into exuberance and celebration and community and bringing everybody together. And the melody is, and it's very, open and uplifting. And we'll see how it relates to some of the other melodies as we continue in this session. But you kind of have to gather in that celebration and then dive deeper in to what it means to open the heart. And, Unetanneh Tokef happens on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur.
Yeah, we're going to get to that wonderful prayer. Not wonderful, complicated prayer. Dan, before we get to Richard's first liturgy, when I was doing my book about the holidays called My Jewish Year, that's not a plug, it's just anchoring in the fact that I did this research, I was surprised that there were 4 Jewish New Years. That Elul, which we discussed last week, which we are continuing to be in, Rosh Hashanah, Tu B'Shvat, which is the birthday of the trees, and then Passover, as you were saying. And it struck me learning that our tradition is kind of affirming second chances, that we don't just get one opportunity to start again, that it's not that necessarily we're going to be forgiven over and over again, but we get a reset more than once. Does that kind of resonate for you?
That's exactly right. That's actually on the heels of what I wanted to say after this beautiful teaching by you, Cantor Cohn, is that part of the reason that I see Rosh Hashanah coming first is that we're in this series of almost delaying the gates closing, right? We prepare through Elul, and then the High Holy Days are here, and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are linked. They're linked in a very special way. In the Torah, of course, from the passage that I read, it follows immediately after. It says, mark the 10th day of this same month, this 7th month. So they're linked. They're linked musically, as we just heard from Cantor Cohn singing that melody. That's pretty unique, actually, that in the nusach, in the prayer modes that the Cantors used, and the Cantors have been using for centuries, that these two holidays are linked. Rosh Hashanah gives us the grandeur, the awe, the terrifying aspects of these times without it saying that it's too late, right? And then even after Yom Kippur, we even have an opportunity through the end of the Sukkot festival on Hoshana Rabbah, where we're still trying to beat out the sins and still trying to correct ourselves. But I think, we need structure as humans. So we need deadlines. And at the same time, we need second chances. And we need to learn that the gates do close, but there's always a chance to open again. There's always a chance to make atonement.
Great. All right. Let's start with the first prayer. Richard, tell us about Aleinu Gadol.
Aleinu Gadol, great Aleinu. We sing Aleinu all the time, right? At the end of services, Aleinu l'shabeach la'adon ha'kol. It's exactly the same words.
And that's when we know that we're very close to the challah on Friday.
So close to the challah. And also it's in a major key, the way we sing it, and it just feels like, okay, we've arrived. And the interesting thing is this text originates in its connection with Rosh Hashanah. So it was later adopted for day-to-day synagogue services, but its origin is in what's called Malchuyot. That is verses of sovereign. Sorry?
I'm sorry, I was frozen, Richard. Are you there? Okay.
I am here.
What did I miss?
We're going to unfreeze you. I stopped.
Okay.
I paused. You didn't miss a thing. So Aleinu is.
You're saying that the Aleinu that we're familiar with started with Rosh Hashanah.
The text begins, in the Malchuyot, the verses of sovereignty or transcendence or grandeur, or any other way that you would want to translate that, in what's called the Musaf, or additional service on Rosh Hashanah in the tradition. And the Malchuyot, the verses of sovereignty or of majesty, constitute the first of three sections of the service in which the shofar is sounded. So Cantor Mutlu is going to be singing about what it means for the shofar to be sounded a little bit later in our session. As we all know, we hear many blasts of the shofar, first in connection with these sovereignty or majesty verses, then with verses known as verses of remembrance, and then verses known as the verses of the shofar itself. And the liturgy, therefore, for this opening paragraph of Aleinu originates in the context of the sounding of the shofar.
And before we go, we step away from the shofar. Can you just remind us, this is very much a wake-up call. I remember Maimonides saying it's like an alarm clock, although Maimonides didn't have an alarm clock exactly. But it is this sense that we're supposed to be alert and awake. Am I right? And that the repetition is to make sure of that alertness.
Right, and the sounds of the shofar take on different forms, right? And the different forms call us to different levels of awareness. In the context of Aleinu Gadol, of the great Aleinu, which introduces the whole liturgy of hearing the shofar, the context is one of praise and also, as I was saying earlier, one of humility. So to locate ourselves in the music for everyone, this is what we hear in synagogue when the cantor begins, Aleinu l'shabeach, which is a very characteristic melody. It means it's on us to give praise. It's on us to praise the one who is the creator of all things. And
So
Yeah.
let me just pause for a minute. You're about to talk about getting to the floor. And when I froze for a minute on Zoom, I just want to make sure you didn't touch yet on the fact that in a regular week when we do an Aleinu, we are just bending on the knees. But you're going to talk about the fact that it's a full prostration that is coming up.
I will discuss that, and I will also point out that the melody itself bows. Aleinu. It descends and then it rises to praise. But when it gets to the words va'anachnu koraim, we, va'anachnu, bend at the knee, umishtachavim, and we prostrate ourselves, it also falls. Va'anachnu is already descending, and then koraim, which means to bend at the knee, starts high, koraim, and descends, and then umishtachavim, which means to prostrate ourselves or to go fully down to the floor in this humble pose, goes even farther, descending into the melody. It's really great if you weren't aware that that's what's actually happening.
It's really wonderful. Let me just ask, as a cantor, isn't that tricky as you're descending? And I know you're going to actually get on your face. Seriously, to keep singing that. How do you?
That's a great challenge, because although nowadays, as you know, if you go to the opera or to theater, singers turn themselves upside down, they roll on the floor, they hang from trees, they float in the air. And so maybe this isn't so difficult, but, usually there are assistants standing by who help the cantor, especially to stand again. There were no assistants in the sanctuary at Central when we recorded this video track that we're going to hear today.
And sorry, Richard, before we get to actual text, I just want to stick with the prostration for a minute, because it's so powerful to see. But there was a time at Central where Dan and our rabbis actually encouraged us to experience it. It's tricky, technically, just logistically, to have us all get on the floor when we're standing either in pews or in some cases in David Geffen Hall of Lincoln Center. But when I have done it, it is a truly transformative experience. Like it kind of knocks your socks off in terms of how unprepared I am for just what it feels like to kind of humble yourself physically, or to physicalize humility in that way. Can you talk about, just particularly in the Reform movement, which is, central, why is that not necessarily so much in our vernacular to have us all get on the floor?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of communities in which I've davened, in which I've prayed, do not prostrate. The cantor does not. It comes across very much like any Friday night or weekday or festival without the complete prostration at all. I don't know. I suppose that in the minds of the reformers, it was too orthodox. They didn't attach a meaning to it. For me, it's like going into child's pose. So if you kind of switch into yoga metaphors, what is it to occupy that space? I'm a child of the divine. I am here to be almost renewed as if I was being born in this moment to the possibilities that this shofar sounds for me.
Dan, can you just weigh in on that, the prostration for you personally? Are you able to sort of really be in it? Or are you thinking very much of the technical requirements at that point to keep singing?
Yeah, well, I would just say that Richard is 100% right about the early reformers, that it's a little bit too messy, and it gets in the way of their decorum. But this is a pose that we just don't get into even alone in our homes, in our private lives, and to do it in community.
Speak for yourself, Dan.
Right, exactly right. I don't know about all of you, but I don't usually get into this pose. And to do it in community, and to kind of show others that you are acknowledging this higher power. You are acknowledging the malchut, the sovereignty of God together as a community, is also part of the power. As it relates to my practice, it is definitely harder to sing the Aleinu when you're, bending your entire body downward towards the ground, and it's hard to get the right resonance and the right support and all of that. But I think it's a good reminder, actually, as to what the prayer is about. It's a surrender. It's not all about you. It's not all about how great you can sing this tune. It's about bowing before your God in front of the open ark.
There's another. Sorry, Abby.
I just wanted to it echoes, Dan, when you were unpacking the Psalm 27 last week, which we say every day of Elul, do not hide your face from me. That kind of plaintive, it's not begging, but we are small and we need you. And it feels to me like this is, again, a kind of very visible physicalizing of that sense of not wanting to be alone or left alone. Don't abandon me. And I realize that whether or not one has full faith, my experience of doing it was exactly as you say, just an acknowledgement of what the world has to offer and how small my place is in it.
There's also a great connection with the earth, right? When you come into contact with the floor and the sense of grounding that comes from that, that's, for me, really materializes. It really embodies what it is to be in a space of receiving and smallness.
So before we go to the videotape, as we say, let's talk a little bit about what we're actually singing. Richard, if you could read a few of the lines and then maybe just give us a taste of the controversy around the Aleinu, because when we learned it actually at Central years ago, I hadn't realized just how much debate there has been about certain lines in this prayer and how all movements, including the Orthodox, have wrestled with it.
I'll be happy to do that. I should mention that the arrangement that we're going to hear is by Simon Sargon, Alav HaShalom, wonderful composer who passed away last year and who has treated this text with what he calls in the notes on the score, solemnity and dignity, which is a beautiful way of understanding it, because some of the arrangements of this great Aleinu are, kind of jubilantly operatic in their triumphant sound. And this arrangement is more modest, which is going to go to your point, Abby, about the text. So it's Aleinu, Aleinu, it's on us. L'shabeach, to praise, and he chooses, Sargon, to repeat the praising word. L'shabeach, which not all arrangers do, and that's already getting us into the feeling of the descent. La'adon hakol, to the one who is the ruler of all things, the one who informs all being. And then it says, latet gedulah, latet, to offer, gedulah, to acknowledge the greatness, the gedulah, l'yotzer bereshit, to the one who forms creation all the time, which is where we begin this prayer. Then come the verses that have a controversy attached to them. Shelo asanu kegoyei ha'aratzot, who has not made us as the nations of the lands, v'lo samanu k'mishpachot ha'adama, and has not placed us in the same way as the families of all the earth. Shelo sam chalkenu kahem v'goralenu k'kol hamonam, who has not made our heritage, our portion, as those other nations, those other families of the earth. And it had more language in it in its original form that was understood more pejoratively. Nowadays, I think we experience it as particularistic in the sense of we have a unique commission as the Jewish people. And in modern translations, in English, editors go to a great length to try to create a cushion around it, because it became a trope for anti-Semitism, right? That the
I
Jews.
just want to make sure that we're following that. Basically, if we just kind of cut to the chase, it sounded like the language was saying we're better. We are, whether we're chosen or superior, we're better. I just want to just read what was problematic, and I know there are different translations. God, who has not made us like the nations of the world and has not placed us like the families of the earth, who has not designed our destiny to be like theirs, nor our lot like that of all their multitude. For they bow to vanity and emptiness and pray to a God who cannot save.
So wow, you went all the way into that.
So that we were maligning essentially, potentially seen as maligning another faith. Am I right?
Those latter words are not in the prayer book that we use, and in fact are not in most prayer books today of many movements, because they were so controversial and created such a sense of peril. Speaking of which, it is written that the melody that we're going to hear, or at least a melody that sounded a lot like it as far as we know, was sung in martyrdom by a community in France in the 12th century. And it's the first mention of this melody. We don't have any music scores. We only have a story that this very haunting melody of Aleinu was sung by this community as they lost their lives. So this plays on both sides, right? It has a great sense of moment for us, as well as having this awkwardness that connected with the text. The way Simon Sargon works with that is he chooses to implement the more gentle parts of this melody in connection with these words, so that they kind of quiet us and acknowledge in a certain way that we do not consider ourselves in a triumphal posture.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's hear it if we can.
Aleinu l'shabeach la'adon hakol la'atit gdula l'yotzer bereshit shelo asanu kegoye ha'aratzot velo samanu kemishpechot ha'adama shelo sam chelkeinu kahem vegoralenu kechol hamonam va'anachnu korim umishtachavim umodim לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש הקדוש ברוך הוא.
Wow. First of all, Yasher Koach, as we say, that was beautiful. Powerful. You didn't get all the way down. I'm not criticizing you, Richard, but I didn't see you.
Sorry, Abby, I think you're breaking up just a little bit. I did try to have my head actually on the step of the leading up to the ark, and that was my offering for that day.
Beautiful. So Dan, we're going to segue to your liturgy now, and it's, I think, going to be slightly jarring to the fact that you're talking about something we're actually not going to hear you sing in synagogue. Those of us lucky enough to be at Central, or those of us who all can be online to watch on the high holidays. But contextualize, we are going to hear you sing Rosh Hashanah, and just talk about how this connects. Where does this piece actually fall in the liturgy?
Right.
We recognize.
Yep. So you're right. This is a text uva shofar gadol that we do not actually sing at Central, and that is not because it isn't important. It's very, very important and central. And actually, the rabbis render this prayer in English. And in this section of liturgy, which starts with the Unetanneh Tokef, there's a lot of sung liturgy. So really, this is the way at Central how we go back and forth from sung interpretation of the liturgy to spoken interpretation. So the first part of the Unetanneh Tokef is the part that we're very familiar with at Central. It's the text is, "Let us declare the sacred power of this day, for it is awesome and it is frightening." And the sounds of Unetanneh Tokef are very mysterious. And if you would let me, I want to sing just a little bit of it for you, just to set the stage of
Absolutely.
mystery.
And while you get your guitar ready, I want to remind everyone that questions should go in the Q&A function, and then they will come to me, and we welcome them.
So I'll just sing the first part of this, and this is the beginning of the Unetanneh Tokef, from which the uva shofar that we're going to hear in a second is taken. So here's Unetanneh Tokef. Unetanneh Tokef kedushat hayom ki hu nora ve'hayom uvo tenaseh malchutecha Mikon bechesed kisecha v'teishev alav be'emet. So I'll stop there.
That's pretty gorgeous.
Thank you. Yes, so the Unetanneh Tokef is a prayer that has a really incredible history. So it is also in the Musaf service, and it comes in the benedictions section of the prayer right before we sing the Kedusha, right before we sing of God's holiness, and it's almost like a little parting poem, this Unetanneh Tokef, setting us up really for this showstopper, which is the declaration of this day as the day of judgment. And the reason why I chose Uva Shofar Gadol is not only because this is a new setting and I wanted to throw you a curveball and to really dive deep into a piece of liturgy that maybe we don't always focus on, but it's also because the themes in this setting really encapsulate the rest of the High Holy Days. Uva shofar gadol hitaka, the great shofar is sounded. Not a shofar, the great shofar. Now remember, we talked about the shofar. This was not a means of communication. This was the means of communication for the people. And it was not just a casual, everyday correspondence. When you heard the sound of the shofar, you knew something was going on, something serious. It with the sound of the shofar, you could imagine the surge of adrenaline that the people felt. So this is not just that shofar, this is the great shofar. And then, right after in the liturgy, it says, a gentle whisper is heard. V'kol demama daka yishama. So the contrast between these two, the great shofar sounding and a gentle whisper is heard, is really, really powerful and stark. Now, where do we get this these words, v'kol demama daka yishama? So Kol Daka, the gentle whisper or a still small voice, actually comes from 1 Kings 19:12. And we learn of Elijah, who is running away from Jezebel. He's running away for his life. He has just been able to prove all of these prophets of Baal that they're completely wrong, and he enacts judgment on them, and he fears for his life because Jezebel said he's going to kill him. So he runs away, and he's looking for reassurance. He's looking for protection. And he looks around and he hears the earthquake and he sees these incredible displays of nature. But he knows that these awesome, powerful displays are due to God. They're caused by God. They're evidence of God, but they're not God themselves. And it's only until he hears the gentle whisper, till he hears Kol Daka, that he knows God is with him. And
I just want to, Dan,
he's reassured.
because I love that you're kind of tying this to the King's liturgy or the verses. I just want to read them quickly. 19:12. There was a great and mighty wind, splitting mountains and shattering rocks by God's power, but God was not in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake, but God was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, fire, but God was not in the fire. And after the fire, a soft murmuring sound. It kind of goes to the intimacy that we were talking about with Elul, and even frankly, in just this conversation that has begun with God on this holiday, that it's not in the big stuff, it's in the small stuff.
Yeah, and you know, the shofar and all of these great things, they call us to attention, they call us to listen, not merely to the obvious, but wake us up to the possibility, wake us up to move out of our ignorances, our habituation of sin, our awaken us to return to a life of God. And that's what this prayer is really all about. Because after, and I'm finally getting to it here, is after the great shofar is sounded, a gentle whisper is heard. The liturgy for Ub Shofar Gadol says, the angels quake with fear, even the angels, and they declare, the day of judgment is here, Hine Yom Hadin, to bring the hosts of heaven to justice. It's not just us down, us lowly folk down here. It's the hosts of heaven. It's everybody is going to be judged. And then the Chazan says, indeed, even they are not guiltless in your sight. So those are the words that I'll sing.
Okay, and Dan, I just want you to just talk about the sheep before we get to what you're going to sing. I think
yes.
the sheep are important in this song that we're not going to hear at Central, what we're going to hear now, but they are there in the Unetanneh Tokef, this idea of us being like sheep passing before God.
That's right. I'll read the rest of the paragraph because this is the end of this section of Unetanneh Tokef, the end of the first section. So after they are not guiltless in your sight, all mankind passes before you like a flock of sheep. As a shepherd seeks out their flock, making his sheep pass under his rod, so do you make all the living souls pass before you. You count and number your creatures, fixing their lifetime and inscribing their destiny. And you had this intense scene of angels quaking with fear and the great shofar sounding and the day of judgment coming. And then you have this serene pastoral scene of God counting, numbering, considering every single soul as a shepherd would count.
But Dan, I'm going to push back on this pastoral aspect because it's pretty chilling what's happening here. This is essentially who's living and who's dying. This is the who will live and who will die prayer. So as pastoral as it might be, it is pretty terrifying. The idea that this is kind of separating the right from the left here. And can you just address the terror of this Unetanneh Tokef, even as there are these beautiful images? You called it a poem. It is a poem, but it's kind of a frightening one.
It's totally frightening, and most of the musical settings will really lean into these angels quaking and the day of judgment. But I think at the end of the day, Abby, we're taught again and again and again that we only have so much control, that we are responsible to a higher power. And so these sheep may still be very frightened, and we might be very frightened of our destiny and what lies ahead for us. But at the end of the day, we have to cede control. We have to say to ourselves, God is in charge. And it's at these moments, in these moments of liturgy, where it is most obvious to us.
Okay. So do you want to give us a little more of the taste we know now, or go to the childhood Dan that we're going to see on the videotape? And if you want to explain that.
Yeah, well, let me explain this. So this video, and so Cantor Cohn said he is in HUC's chapel, Hebrew Union College's chapel, and the video you'll see takes place in that chapel. In 2008, I don't know, like 100 years ago, I presented my senior recital there, and I focused on the compositions of two Golden Age cantors. So Golden Age cantor is from the dates around 1890 to 1950, and it's considered by many Jewish musicologists and historians to be really the greatest era of not only Jewish music, but Jewish musicological efforts, and strong sense of Jewish identity, and that there was really never a time like it, and hasn't since been a time like it. And cantors were really focusing on their craft, and were able to bring this liturgy into to new heights. So I focused on two cantors, David Reutman and Yosef Shlisky. This piece, Uva Shofar Gadol, is a piece that he sang. I actually transcribed this piece from one of his old recordings to make a choral edition of it. And you'll see in the recording, so I'm dressed in traditional cantorial garb. I've got the Eastern European kova, the hat, complete with a pom-pom at the top. The video is a little grainy, but you'll be able to see it. And behind me actually is a choir. And the choir are almost representing those angels, right? Those angels quaking with fear. And you'll hear and see the interplay between us. I say, malachim yichafezun, and the angels are quaking with fear, and then they'll repeat that, and the angels are quaking with fear. Vichil urada yochezun. It goes back and forth in this drama. But dear to my heart, because actually my wife is singing in the choir behind me, and our violinist too, Caleb, is in the choir behind me. These were all of my choir
So this is
friends
family.
and buddies. Yeah, this is family. So I really wanted to share it with my central family and share a piece of music that really is deep to my heart. I want to just point out a couple things musically, if I may. So the first line that I sing, the very first thing you'll hear, it goes, Uve shofar gadol. That already sounds like a shofar, right? Do-do, do-do, do-do. And that is the great shofar is sounded. But then when we get the still small voice, you'll hear the vocal line go very, very high and very, very soft. Okay. And this is all happening against the backdrop of the choir humming quietly. And then you'll hear the music become very, very intense with the back and forth antiphonal singing that I talked about when we get to the text about the angels.
Great. I just want to remind everyone, because we're going to be in our last 15 minutes, to please send your questions in, because we're going to go to your questions after the tape. And let's hear it.
All right.
Uve shofar gadol yitoka
O Malachim Yachazon, Vichil Orada Yochazon, V'yamru, Hine Yom
Wow, that's a big wow. Maybe there's a movement to bring back the shofar gadol. What do you think?
I'd be the first one in line.
Yeah, that was exquisite, Dan.
Really was. Okay, so we're going to go to your wonderful questions. I can't believe we're already running out of time. Gail Fine is asking, this is for you, Richard. When talking about the full prostration of Aleinu Gadol, this is the only time that we as Jews get to the floor, but there are other religions like Muslims who go full prostration always. So is there a reason why this is the only time that we do it?
There's a source that holds this is exactly why we only do it for these occasions connected with High Holy Days. At some point, it was determined that we should not have the same practice as that of other faiths that had a practice of prostration, and that it would be reserved for the High Holy Day moments in the shofar service where we experienced it tonight, and in the avodah service on Yom Kippur, the service of the high priest.
Great. Dan, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and it's really in our choreography and our we have different moves kind of as a people, right? And the full prostration is not so much a part of our repertoire, but bowing certainly is, and we bow all the time during the Baruch Hu. We bow during the regular year when we sing Aleinu, and they're all in deference. They're all in deference to God. So this is kind of reserved as the most special, exalted moment to
The big bow.
The big one. Yeah.
Okay, Penelope Cohn is saying, I have never been able to accept that who will live and who will die is literally happening. Yes, we are responsible to God. I assume I'm not the only one. I assume she means who struggles. What other commentary is there along this line? I know there's huge commentary that wrestles with this idea of free will versus God's verdict. But can you tell us a little bit, Dan, about how you
I see it as a question of theology too, right? You're going to see these prayers very, very differently depending on what your view of God is, how you experience God in your life, and if you view God as determining who will live and who will die, without regard to our lives, without regard to creation, then it almost as if it is a random act of a decree, then I think it is hard. But I would say that part of the answers that I would receive from my rabbis growing up when I was, in the yeshiva, is that a lot of coming to God, you have to come to God through mystical means as well. And there's only so much that you're going to be able to glean and understand through kind of erudite, scholarly studies of God's workings in the universe. And there were questions that we would press the rabbis on, kind of like this, and it would get to a point where the rabbis would say that you have to experience God not just cerebrally and to understand some of this liturgy. And I think that it depends a lot on theology and how you see God acting in the world. And these are hard prayers. They're hard things to come face to face with, and that's why we prepare so much.
Yeah, and I would say that just, from my armchair place, that I don't think they would have endured if they weren't so complicated. That's part of why that they stay alive. Richard, I'm going to give you this one from Ed Saslaw. I so respect Cantor Mutlu's love for Chazanut, but don't the many new settings that are sung by so many of the cantors minted by Cantor Cohn and his colleagues say something about another golden era we may be in now? I think that all of us at Central really welcome some of the new musical liturgy that has been brought to us, and Dan is one of the great composers. But are we allowed? Do we have permission to kind of love the new stuff?
Well, certainly there are even contemporary settings of Unetanneh Tokef and Uvashofar Gadol that we hear in a lot of synagogues. I think, and Ed, I really thank you for the question. It's nice to see you here. I guess what's coming up for me is that the different repertories tend to serve somewhat different purposes. So the piece that Dan interpreted so eloquently goes into minute detail in the expression of each word, and in some cases each syllable of each word. And so it's not just the overall sense of chazanut, of cantorial artistry, it's the way that the text is expressed with such poetry and such poignancy in the music of the style that Dan was singing. In our contemporary pieces, a different dimension of the same text can be heard and experienced. And in some congregations, we hear different style settings of Unetanneh Tokef on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur.
Okay. You both are giving wonderful answers, and now I'm going to ask you to be a little more compact as we get to the finish line, because I want to get to all of these. Paula Hunker is asking, from a congregant's perspective, the cantor's role during the high holiday services seems very evocative of the high priest's role during temple times. So Dan, why don't you take this? She's saying much more even so than the rabbi. So from your point of view as a cantor, do you feel this? Do you feel that connection?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are taught on one hand that our service has transposed from the temple service, right? We are making offerings much like the priests made offerings to God. We make them in very different ways, but we are still making offerings together. We're also taught, however, though, that the priests were very, very much, an error unto themselves. And if you go into traditional hardcore circles, they're only coming back when the Mashiach comes, right? When the temple comes back. But there's something very telling about the fact that the Torahs in our ark are dressed like the priests. They have the same kind of tunic that's described in the Torah. They have the same breastplate with the stones that are described in the Torah, and even down to the rimonim, the bells that are on top of the Torah that alert you of the Torah's presence when it's coming down for a hakafah. Now, the priests would also wear bells because they wanted to alert God that they were approaching the sanctuary so they wouldn't startle God. You don't want to startle God in the most holy place on the planet. But it kind of shows you that the Torah now becomes the way that we approach God, that we learn about God, that we can commune with God, and that we don't need intermediaries and intercessors, right? So on one hand, yes, the Cantors is skilled in being able to kind of amass and bring the prayers of the people up to God, but it's not something that another person couldn't do if they wanted to do it. And the real way
to be the sense that there was only one who could go into the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies.
Exactly. It was a special.
It's in a way, it's a more accessible tradition.
Exactly.
Just because you mentioned that the Torahs are essentially dressed up. When we saw Richard's amazing recording, Rabbi Joy Levitt just reminded me that those would usually be white, those Torahs in front of the ark. I want to just actually end with Sarah's question, which is a perfect way, I think, to let each of you answer, which is how do you want us each to feel when we walk out of a Rosh Hashanah service? With these two pieces and the music generally, obviously we have the entirety of the service and so much else happens, but as cantors, as sort of the choreographers of an emotional journey here, what do you want us to walk away with or walk out feeling? Richard, do you want to start?
Sure, I'm going to go with the shofar. Awake, 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 awakened in heart, awakened in soul, awakened in our thoughts, so that the 10 days of repentance, of turning, of tshuva can be really, really powerful. The best thing that could possibly occur at the conclusion of Rosh Hashanah is that we go out with a great sense of aliveness to the possibilities of the entire season and seek the reconciliation and harmony of Yom Kippur and of Ne'ilah.
And we're going to be getting to that next week. Daniel, you have the last word.
I would say that I would want people to feel that their prayers were heard, that however, whatever they came in with, whatever they needed God to hear was heard by God. And to remember that revelation does not come to us like an earthquake. It doesn't come to us like a torrential downpour. It comes to us in those moments when we strain, when we, through yearning, really dare to listen and seek God.
Thank you, Cantor Mutlu, Cantor Cohn, and Rabbi Berman, Sarah Berman, for organizing this wonderful conversation. I've learned so much, and I hope all of you who were strong enough again to leave the sunshine of an August day will join us one more time as we go into, I think what do we call, this is the Gadol of the high holidays, which is Yom Kippur. Next week, Tuesday, same time, 6 p.m. Eastern time. There's two beautiful, really heartrending pieces that Dan and Richard are going to share with us and explain. And I hope you will join us for this, share it with your friends and family as we prepare for the work of atonement, which again, despite the sunshine, should take some rigor, I would say. Thank you both. Thank you all for being with us. And I'll see you next week, I hope.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.